Hey everybody, it's Josh with ClearPath, where we help normal-sized churches create communications that look good, work better, and reach more. Today we're going to be taking a look at a very particular part of Planning Center People, and that is the place where you create your lists for communicating via email, text notification, and push notification in the Church Center app. Now, this is a pretty basic part of Planning Center People, but I do get a lot of churches that can get confused about how to use it properly and how to make sure that it's working well as basically this hyperdrive engine for communicating with their church. So we're going to be taking a look at the basics, but I'm also going to be giving you some tips on how to use it to really maximize your communication with your church and reach them with your announcement in an efficient and powerful way. But before we dive into that, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, if you have not yet already, that is, because here you're going to get all the newest videos and tutorials that we create. All right, let's dive into Planning Center People's lists. So today we're going to be spending some time looking at Planning Center lists. And the first question that we really need to answer is, why are lists important? There's many things you can do in Planning Center, and I would argue that most of them are relatively important. But I would say lists are actually one of the most important places. And the reason for that is lists are the place where you are able to do mass communication with very strategic groups of people, and you're able to keep those lists up to date over and over again all the time, and you're able to communicate with those lists in multiple ways depending on kind of what you're doing and what's going to be the best thing for you. So lists are really a central place where you're getting your communication done. And in addition to being a place where in Planning Center lists you can email people and you can even send text to people or push notifications to the Church Center app, and we'll get to that in a little bit. It also integrates with your MailChimp account, which is likely the place where you're doing something like a more formatted and designed email to your congregation. And so when you have all of your lists in Planning Center lists, you are able to keep your Planning Center audience, MailChimp audience up to date all the time with multiple segments that you can email very easily directly from MailChimp without having to do any of the updating of your contact list in MailChimp. Everything's done right here in lists, and it works quite seamlessly. And so it's a really important and powerful place to be keeping lists of people based on different types of criteria, which we're going to get into in a little bit, but then being able to keep your contact audiences up to date with MailChimp and even some other texting platforms if you do like some of those third-party platforms, all from this one place that you only have to keep one spot up to date. So very powerful, very important, and I just really encourage you to get into it. So now let's go ahead and take a look at one list. And so I'm in my ClearPath test account right now. And right now I'm in a list that I just called test list. And right here you can see the results of this list. And you can see there's really not a lot of information here because I didn't want to put a bunch of people's email addresses and phone numbers and all that kind of stuff here for everybody to see. But when you go over here in your list and your result, just so you know, of course, you can display tons of different kinds of information directly in the results. Download that information, put it into a PDF, whatever you want to do, you can do it here. But I'm going to keep my list very simple with just the first and last name just to show you that it is populating based on these rules. Now, when a lot of people start with Planning Center, or really any church management system, their assumption is that in order to create contact lists, they're going to create a name of that list, and then they're going to pull in individually every person that they want in that contact list. But that's not how a data management system works. This one and ones made by other companies work in a way where you create rules or criteria that you are applying to this particular list, and this list is looking for people in the Planning Center system that qualify for this particular list. So in this case, I created one very simple rule that I want this list to include people in Planning Center People whose personal information has an email address, any type of email address, and then it simply exists in the system. So when I'm creating this list, I'm trying to create a list that has everybody in my system that I have an email address for. And that's a great way to do something if you're trying to create, for instance, like an all-church email list. I will get into some of the limitations of sending emails through Planning Center in a little bit, but for now it's just a good practice to know that you can create very simple lists like this. But also, you may want to create some more complicated rhythms in here, some rules that maybe exclude certain people. Maybe you don't want people to get an email if they are between a certain age. Like you don't want people to get an email if they're between like the ages of 1 and 10 or something like that, or birth and 10. Well, in that case, what you'd want to do is create a condition to this. So I'm going to create a condition, and I am going to exclude people whose, and I'm going to go to their personal information, age is between the ages of 0 and let's say 10 years, okay? And so I would create this condition so that I am looking for all people with email addresses, and I am excluding people whose personal information is what I just put in there. Now, this can become very, very confusing for people very quick. As long as you're doing only one type of rule here, it's very simple. But the minute that you start adding conditions to that rule and new rules on top of those rules, that's when it can get a little bit confusing for people. And you really got to think through what you're creating there and making sure that you are creating your list properly. Because if you create it the wrong way, you could easily have a list that does not have the people in it who you're trying to have in it because you didn't create your rule the right way. So I'd really encourage you to take some time and learn about this, but just kind of a couple basics here. First of all, you can create multiple rules. And so you can create one rule that you're creating and bringing people into the list, and you can bring a whole other rule into it that has other kinds of criteria that you're doing with it. And you can do this really as many times as you want to. You probably don't want to get too crazy elaborate with all this, but you have a lot of flexibility on what you do here. But then within each rule, you can create conditions for that particular rule. And that is where you're saying, well, you know, you want everybody with an email list, but I don't want to include people who are between these ages and these ages, or I do want to include people between the age of 11 and 100 or something like that, so that it looks for people who, number one, have an email address and are between the ages of 11 and 100 or something like that. And you can just layer on as many rules as you want to. And to make things a little bit more complicated, you can make it so that it is looking for any of these things, or is looking for either of these things, instead of all. And so when you say all, it needs to include both these things in order for this rule to be correct. If you're doing any, then it could be either or of these rules, and that changes the way that these rules work. And if this seems a little bit confusing to you, it's okay, because it is a little bit confusing. It really just takes a lot of kind of logically thinking through how you're creating a rule, how you're excluding or including people into that particular rule. But then I would say a lot of trial and error and just running those numbers with things that you know are going to pop up yes or no, like you know this person qualifies for this, and you look and say, yes, this person did qualify it for whatever, and then you could go and say, well, I know this person should have qualified for this list, but they didn't, so what's wrong with my rules here? And there's some great helpful tools in Planning Centers, Planning Center University, that really walks you through a lot of this stuff and kind of just gives you lots of great information about how to engage with these lists. But the purpose of our time here really isn't just to learn about how they work. I want to give you some tools to really use this to just put your communications into hyperdrive. Another little thing here before we dive into that is you can create all these rules, but you can also add these kind of what you might call a secondary condition here, where you can say my list should include only exact matches or all household members of matches. So if it's finding, for instance, like a person with an email address, but I also want to make sure that I have the spouse and the kids of the person with the email address, it's going to find them, and it's also going to include all the household members, or exclude children or whatever, or include inactive profiles, all these kind of little things that you can add on there to make sure that your list is as full and complete as you want it to be. Next thing I want to show you here is how to organize your list. I think this is really important because it's easy to start just creating lists and going, you know, here's your list for this, list for that. But then the thing is, other people in your system are also going to be creating lists, and before long, you're going to have a lot of lists that you need to sort through, and these are lists that you want to get at fairly easily. And so when you're creating lists, I think it's really helpful right from the beginning to actually start to categorize your lists. And so in any of these lists, you can go to Manage List Categories, and you can create a category where you're going to say this is maybe I just want to call this Josh's lists, so that everybody knows that these are lists that I created and I can use that for whatever. And so I'm done now. And what I want to do is I want to categorize this test list as part of Josh's list. That way, when I'm actually looking through lists, I can just look at the categories and look for Josh's list. I do this a lot for churches when, for instance, the pastor has certain lists that the pastor likes to use, or there are lists that maybe certain deacons or elders are going to be using only, so they don't get overwhelmed by the quantity of lists. There's a couple other really important things in here. One is, almost always, with a few exceptions, you want to auto-refresh your results. And what that means is every night, and I believe it's at 2 a.m., 2 a.m., your list is going to refresh and look for new people who might qualify for that list. So if it's a Sunday, for instance, and you had some new people come into your planning center system, that night it's going to auto-refresh and it's going to possibly add new people into this system. And that's a really helpful way to make sure that these lists stay up to date. There are some instances that you may not want to do that, like if you create a list that you know is going to change, but you don't want that list to change because that's like a static list that you don't want updating for whatever reason. I recently did this for a church. Then you would just toggle that off, and then it's not going to update unless you do it manually. The other thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go in here and make sure that your MailChimp is updating and syncing every night. So this one syncs the list itself. This one integrates and pushes that new list information to MailChimp, so that when you go into MailChimp, you're able to get that stuff going. The other thing you're going to want to do here is, if this is a list that you want to share with other people and other people are going to need to use, you need to make sure that you share it with all managers and that you decide if you want them to only see it or if you actually want them to be able to manage and alter that list in some way. And so if you don't do that, you might create a list that maybe other people are intended to see, but they're going to go into Planning Center people and they're not going to see it, and they're going to get frustrated, and you need to make sure you go into there and get that stuff done. So these are some settings that you need to work with. Just another note, if you were to duplicate a list, it will duplicate the list and the rules, but it's not going to necessarily duplicate, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't, your filter settings, your auto refresh, your MailChimp, or who it's visible to. These are things every time you duplicate a list and then maybe change it slightly that you need to go in here and reset all of these things to how you want them to be. Another area I want to show you, which is really, really helpful and powerful, and I don't think enough people take advantage of it, are these automations. Now, automations are, by definition, things that automatically happen when someone is added to a list. So in this particular case, if you were to have a new person, for instance, like a new visiting attender, like a new guest list for Sunday morning, and you had a way of triggering that, like any new name that came into the system were to be added to this list, and that was one of the rules that you did, you're going to have people automatically come into this list. Well, there's a couple cool things you can do to automate a process, both internally but also communication-wise. Number one is you can send an automatic email. So if we have somebody added to this list, then maybe we want to go send an email from a template. And the templates are simply just the different kinds of email templates that you've created, and you can mess with that on your own. But you may create like a, hey, welcome to our church kind of template, where it has just a basic letter from the pastor and maybe 2 or 3 important things to know about the church and some action steps or something like that. So that now when they're added to Planning Center and they're added to this list that night or the next day, they're going to get an email from the pastor saying, hey, welcome, I'm so glad you chose to join us on Sunday, and that stuff's just going to happen automatically. Now, there's always really great personal touch things that you want to be doing with new people, but it is also helpful to have different automations that maybe send helpful information so that that information doesn't get lost in the mix. So that's a really helpful thing you can do, is create an automation that is going to reach out to those people. You can also make the automation apply to people who are already on the list, but let's not do that. Let's just save that. So I've added one automation, but let's create another one. Another really helpful one for a process like new people at the church is to go ahead and add them to a workflow. And in this case, you'd want to create a workflow, which we're not going to get into today, a workflow that helps you process new people. And so step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 in your workflow section. You can make it so that anytime someone's added to this list for new people, that they're also going to be added to that workflow, and you can actually work that person through that new visitor checklist. And so a lot of really helpful things that at the end of the day, I think the point is that you are automating important processes so that things don't slip and that you have just a better sense of what you're supposed to be doing with people who land in these lists for various reasons that you may create. Next thing I want to show you is just how to use these lists to power your communications. When these lists first came out, all you could really do was email people, and even those were not quite as full and powerful as you wanted them to be. But now you actually have a lot of options and things that you can do in order to connect with people and to do different stuff. So usually there's going to be a few options. You're going to see text and email and a push notification via the Church Center app. I don't have the Church Center app activated on this particular account, and so this knows it, and so you can't do that. But what you're going to be able to do here is you're going to be able to, for that kind of basic, really more personal information, you're going to be able to email lists, and you're going to be able to go in here and you can do, sender tags here so it inserts their name. You can attach files now, which isn't something you could do right when it started. You can do links. You can decide which email account it's going to be coming from. But whenever you send an email through Planning Center, it is going to be coming from the person who's logged in. So in this case, it will say it's from Josh. And if another person was logged in, even using the same list, it's going to say that it's coming from that person and not me. And then you have a couple options here. One is you can just send the email through Planning Center. And if you do that, the person is going to get an email from you, and it's going to be Planning Center formatted, meaning it's going to have your logo at the top, the church logo that is, and then it's going to have just a really nicely formatted email, and it's going to look like it was from like some sort of an email system, not exactly a personal email. But if you were to toggle this, send through MailChimp, what's going to happen then is it's going to send a basic email. It's still going to be coming from Josh. It's still going to be plain text, but it's not going to have any of the, the logos or any of that stuff on it. It's actually going to look like a very basic email, except it will have unsubscribe stuff at the bottom. The difference here is that now, even though it's just a basic looking email, I can log into MailChimp and I can actually see this campaign and read the report of who opened it and how many times it was opened and if people clicked on it, all the kind of stuff that you can usually see when you look at a campaign that's actually happening in MailChimp. Your third option, which many churches opt to do for most things, is to actually go into MailChimp and send from this particular list. And in that case, of course, you can use your MailChimp templates, you can add buttons and videos and all that great stuff you can do with MailChimp, but you're using this list and you're not having to go into MailChimp and update anything there. The biggest distinction when you're going into MailChimp is that you're going to have a MailChimp audience for Planning Center, just one audience. And all of your lists are going to be categorized as tags within that audience. So if you have 20 lists that are syncing with MailChimp through Planning Center, then you're going to see 20 tags, and you're going to need to choose which one of those tags, or in this case, what it's talking about is lists, that you're actually emailing in MailChimp. Another thing you can do here, of course, is you can send a text. Texting is not free with Planning Center, so you actually do have to go into your account settings and purchase text credits. I really recommend that churches use texting sparingly and use it for important things. Texting is a really great way to get a one-off, simple but powerful announcement across. And one of the reasons it's so powerful is because people pay attention to text a little bit more than they do. It's more than they do in email, partly because it's so immediate. It just pops up on their phone and they want to see if it's from a friend of theirs. But it's also just, it's something unique. It stands apart from the email that you send every week. And so it is a really helpful thing to do, unless, of course, you send a text every day, and now people are going to get kind of used to it and tired of it, and maybe they won't pay attention to it very much. So I do recommend that if you do send text through the system, that you do so sparingly and with really important text. The other thing you can do is you can send a push notification specifically to people on this list who have the Church Center app and are logged into the Church Center app at that time, and you can actually do a push notification. The push notifications are pretty cool. You can do a heading, you can do a text area, and you can do a call to action button with a link. Even though I think that is really cool and it does a lot of neat stuff, something you do need to realize, of course, is that not everybody pays attention to their push notifications. Not everybody is very savvy on how to find push notifications that they missed. And so if it's a really important email, I would definitely encourage, if you're going to do a push notification, make sure you're backing up that with some other form of communication like a text or an email, or at least making sure that information is available in an email. Because again, even though push notifications are really great and helpful, it can get frustrating if people didn't get it or they saw it for a second and now they can't find it. And of course, that's not the point of an announcement. All right, so that's about all we want to go through just with Planning Center list. Obviously, you could spend a lot of time tinkering around with the list, with the rules, with the different ways you can do the different rules, how elaborate you can make your list. But my encouragement to you, if you're just starting out, is just try out some stuff. Get in there, make some lists. Make sure that you have the information and the profiles and the people that you want for the things that you're doing, because you may actually need to go in and fill out the information in those profiles quite a bit more, or make some custom categories to really customize those qualifications the way that you want to and how you're going to be communicating with your church. But I would really encourage you to take advantage of these lists for communication, because this is going to be a way to not just make sure that you are sending out different types of communication, push notifications, emails, and texts, but also that the lists that you're sending that to are always up to date, and they're always emailing the people that are actually a part of the ministries and meet the qualifications of those lists that you've created. I hope you found this helpful. I hope that you have fun experimenting with Planning Center lists. Of course, if you have any questions, Planning Center has an incredible knowledge base, and so when you log in here, you can always go up here to the little question mark, and it's going to bring up a thing that lets you search for questions, look at their knowledge base, or even enter a support ticket. And their customer support is just wonderful. They're just very quick at getting back to you with practical answers to your questions. So enjoy Planning Center, people, and enjoy these lists.